Well, stories are coming from the Middle East fast and furious. The maddening thing is that many times the stories directly contradict each other. So you find yourself sorting through, trying to figure out what is really going on here, what should really be believed. Is there disinformation being released for the very purpose of not only confusing all of us, but to confuse the enemy? That would, of course, be the number one purpose. But all these stories, let me give you an example. Panetta, who is, of course, our Secretary of Defense, says U.S. military fully prepared to deal with Iran threat. Barack says Israel very far off from decision on Iran attack. Iran says in touch with big powers on new nuclear talks. The European Union denies it. Netanyahu, current Iran sanctions won't curb its nuclear program. So we're seeing conflicting statements even between Ehud Barak, the defense minister of Israel, and Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel. For example, I just read to you where Barak said that, where Netanyahu said that current Iran sanctions won't curb its nuclear program. And yet, in this article today from the Jerusalem Post, it says this: Defense Minister Ehud Barak said during a Wednesday interview, that would be earlier today, with Army Radio, that international efforts to slow Iran's nuclear program were working, and that a decision about an Israeli attack on Iran was far off. Now, I personally like the fact that Barak is saying that an attack on Iran is far off. Now, what does far off mean? However, actually later on in the article, Barak was asked that question when pressed as to whether very far off meant weeks or months. Barak replied, "I wouldn't want to provide any estimates. It's certainly not urgent." So Netanyahu says that the sanctions are not working. Barak says they are working and that there's a lot of time left, that it's not urgent. So hopefully the thing is being put off. Now, in the meantime, though, there's another article appearing that President Obama has not only sent a warning to Iran not to block the Straits of Hormuz, saying that that would be a red line, that would force the U.S. to go in with force to unblock the Straits. But in the same letter, let me just read it to you. U.S. President Barack Obama has called for direct talks with Iran in a secret letter to the Islamic Republic's supreme leader that also warned Iran against closing the strategic Strait of Hormuz. A conservative Iranian lawmaker has quoted as saying on Wednesday. So President Obama is proposing direct talks. And, really, I find no fault with that whatsoever. Anything that can be done to head off armed conflict should be done. There's nothing wrong with saying we'll sit down and talk, we'll do whatever. However, there are issues here that cannot be ignored. So that's what's being said. Let me give you a little bit more of this. I know our callers are starting to call in right now, and if you'd like to be on the program with us, the number to call is 877 Endtime. And I know we've talked a lot about a potential conflict with Iran, but there's good reason to talk a lot about it. When we've got a prophecy, a prominent prophecy, verses 13 through 21 of chapter 9, there are 7 trumpets in the book of Revelation. This is the 6th trumpet. When that happens, the Bible prophesies a war from the area of the Euphrates River that will kill 1/3 of mankind. Why should we be talking about it? If we knew there was a flood coming that was going to destroy the earth, shouldn't we be talking about it? Well, ladies and gentlemen, this war will kill many, 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 many times more than Noah's flood, because in Noah's day the population was very small compared to what it is today. I cannot tell you exactly how large it was back in Noah's day, but this is going to kill 2.3 billion people. There weren't even 1 billion people on Earth until 1810 AD. So this is going to kill the worlds of Noah many times over, many times over. So we're not talking about a little thing here. We are talking about the greatest Holocaust, the greatest catastrophe in the history of the world. If we're watching the buildup to the sixth trumpet war as it is described in Revelation chapter 9, verse 13 through 21, if that's what we're watching here, and the Bible tells us that that's the part of the world where this sixth trumpet war will begin, that's where all the tension is right now. If we are watching that, then we should not only be talking about it every day, we should be talking about it all day, every day. We should be screaming at the top of our lungs, waving red flags with warning, because that means that mankind is facing the greatest catastrophe in the history of the human race. How can we overstate it? You can't. Not when you're talking about 2.3 billion people dying. There weren't even 2 billion on this planet until, what was it, 1930 or something like that. So we're talking about wiping out an entire world as it existed as late as 1940, 45, 50, somewhere in that neighborhood. It took up to that point to have 2.3 billion people. Well, now this prophecy says that 2.3 billion people will die in this coming war. So we're talking about a whole world wiped out as it was in the days of 1930, 1935. So it's huge, and I know we've talked about it a lot, but it's in the news, and it's in the news every day, and for good reason, because, well, these things are absolutely amazing. We are taking your phone calls on the program today. I think we're going to dive right in. Let's go ahead and go to Oklahoma. John is calling from there. Hello, John.
Hello, Irvin.
What's on your mind?
Couple of things. First of all, earlier in the week when you were talking about Russia and you know, their proclamation that they were going to back Iran, it would be like attacking Moscow. I think we should keep in mind with that proclamation from Russia their recent history in World War II. They changed sides in the middle of the thing, you know, so their bluster might not have a lot of backing to it if, you know, something starts between America and Israel with Iran, and it looks like Iran is going down pretty easy. I wouldn't put much faith in Russia backing up its words. It's an atheistic country, so it doesn't hesitate to lie through its teeth, you know, just for who knows what their reasons are, you know. But, you know, I wouldn't put too much faith in the Russians because of, you know, what they did in World War II.
Yeah, well, think of it this way, though, John. The fact is they concluded a treaty with Adolf Hitler, and they only changed their mind when Hitler turned on them. He forced them to change their mind because he turned on them and invaded Russia. So that was the reason they switched sides back in those days.
Well, that's a good point.
Yeah. On the other hand, we also know that Russia will absolutely be aligned with Iran at the Battle of Armageddon, because Ezekiel 38 tells us that the chief prince of Meshech, the word Meshech is the root word for Moscow, according to unabridged dictionaries, that Meshech and Iran, under the name Persia, of course, will come down against Israel at Armageddon. So we already know Russia and Iran are going to be allied. Now, I tend to believe, though, that Russia would stay out of this war, because Russia survives as a power and then becomes a very prominent player in the end-time world government. We know that, and I'm talking about after this war. We know that because Revelation chapter 13, verse 1 and 2 describes the world government beast as having the feet of the bear, definitely referring to Russia. So Russia does survive and plays a prominent role in the government of the one world government of the Antichrist. So I sort of think they would probably stay out. Yeah. But I'm certainly not sure of it.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that. And that sort of goes along with what I said a little bit, that they are going to be part of the one world government, so the Antichrist government. So in order to be there to do that, the political situation would have had to change enough that they could align themselves with these European countries, which right now doesn't seem very likely that they would be aligned with England and some of these other countries. But World War III could definitely change that.
Yeah, and furthermore, Russia has been saying for a while, we are a European power, because Mikhail Gorbachev all the time talked about Russia being a part of Europe. And Pope John Paul II also referred to, well, it was Gorbachev, I guess, that talked about our common European home. So the Soviet Union was somewhat of a Eurasia power, but since the Soviet Union has dismantled and Russia's somewhat standing alone, Russia's more of a European power than they are, in fact, a Eurasian power. And Russia, does have a seat at the table of NATO now, even though they they blow hot and cold there, but they do have a seat at the councils of NATO.
Yeah, I think if we could trust them, meaning NATO and America and Europe together, if they could somehow become more trustworthy, then I think that they would be welcomed into some alliance that goes along with the Antichrist. Well, one of the things that I heard you say yesterday or the day before is that at the time of Armageddon, all of the countries of the world would come against Israel. But would that include America? I can't just see America going from best friend, best protector, all of a sudden, to one of the nations that would be against Israel.
Yeah, I tend to think not. When it says all nations will come against Jerusalem to battle, I think that's going to mean that the United Nations has voted. And so the UN, as the representative for all the nations of the world, would be coming down. Perhaps the veto power has been abolished by then, and so there was a vote taken at the UN Security Council. So consequently, if you're a member of the United Nations, you agree to abide by the majority vote of the UN Security Council. So if we lose that vote and the UN comes down, it would come down under a global governance banner, even though the U.S. troops may not be there. Yeah,
that sounds really good, because the U.S. relationship with the UN is only based on that it can use the UN right now to get certain things done that it wants. But like you say, if it loses that absolute veto power, I think the U.S. would leave the United Nations in a heartbeat.
Depending on who's president at the time, of course. You're listening to Politics and Religion. Hey, by the way, thanks a lot, John. Appreciate the good phone call. You're listening to Politics and Religion, and we'll be back in just a moment.